While I was in the hospital, my mom and sister put my 4-year-old daughter in a box and told her she was being returned to the factory. I came home to find her crying inside it with a strange man standing over her, threatening to take her away while my family laughed. I didn't scream, I acted. A week later, they were the ones screaming. My name's Paige Collins. I'm 31 years old. The appendectomy went smoother than expected, so the doctor discharged me a day early. The whole ordeal felt surreal. One minute I was making Sadie dinner, the next I was doubled over with a pain so sharp it felt like a hot knife was twisting in my gut. Now, just 2 days later, I was on my way home. I took a cab from the hospital, wincing every time the car hit a pothole. The stitches in my right side pulled with a dull, insistent ache, a constant reminder of the piece of me that was now missing. All I wanted was to get back to my own bed, to the familiar smell of my apartment, and most of all, to my daughter. I was looking forward to surprising Sadie, my 4-year-old. Her world was so small and safe, and my sudden absence had probably felt like an earthquake. Maybe we'd order pizza, her favorite, and watch a movie buried under a mountain of blankets on the couch. That thought was a small, warm light in the gray exhaustion of the past 48 hours. My ex-husband, a man who had promised to be my partner in all things, hadn't even called to check on me, not that I expected him to. He'd walked out on us when Sadie was barely 2, and his interest in being a father was about as reliable as a chocolate teapot. It was just me and her, a team of 2 against the world. The cab pulled up to my apartment building, a modest 3-story walk-up that swallowed most of my paralegal paycheck. I paid the driver, grabbing my small overnight bag, and walked slowly toward the front door, each step a careful negotiation with the angry stitches in my side. As I put my key in the lock, I heard voices from inside my apartment. A woman's laugh, sharp and familiar. My mom, and then a man's voice. Not one I recognized. It was low and rough, and the words he was saying made the blood in my veins turn to ice. He was telling a child to hold still and cooperate. My heart hammered against my ribs. My hand froze on the doorknob, the cold metal biting into my palm. My daughter Sadie was supposed to be with my mom, Sharon, but who was this man? Why was he telling my child to cooperate? 100 terrible scenarios flashed through my mind, each one worse than the last. The world narrowed to the sound of that voice and the flimsy wooden door that stood between me and my daughter. I pushed the door open, my body moving on pure, cold adrenaline. The scene in my living room didn't make sense at first, like a nightmare that my tired, post-surgery brain couldn't quite process. It was a tableau of casual cruelty. My mom, Sharon, was lounging on my couch, the one I was still paying off, with a smirk plastered on her face. She held a can of cheap light beer, condensation beating on the side. My younger sister, Kelsey, was standing a few feet away, her phone held up, recording. She was giggling, a high, breathy sound that grated on my nerves. And then I saw the man. He was greasy-looking, with stringy hair and a faded band t-shirt stretched tight over a soft belly. This had to be Trent, some new hanger-on my mom had picked up. He was standing over a large, brown cardboard box, the kind you use for moving a wardrobe. Scrawled across the side in thick, sloppy black marker were the words, "Baby Factory Returns." Inside that box was my daughter. Sadie was huddled in the corner of it, her small body trembling. Her face was pale and streaked with tears, her big blue eyes wide with a terror I had never seen before. Her favorite pink overalls looked dirty, and her little hands were clenched into tight fists at her sides. At her feet, a cheap animatronic dog toy, all matted white fur and plastic eyes, yapped and clicked mechanically, its head jerking back and forth in a grotesque parody of life. Every time it barked, Sadie flinched. My mom just laughed, a sound like gravel scraping against glass. She took a sip of her beer and pointed at Sadie. "Get a good shot of her face, Kels," she said, her voice slurring slightly. "It's priceless. This is going to get so many views." Kelsey zoomed in with her phone, her thumb tapping the screen. "Hold still, Sadie Bug," she said, her voice syrupy sweet and utterly false. "It's just a game." But it wasn't a game, it was torture. And they were my family. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. The rage that flooded me was so absolute, so pure, it felt like a block of ice forming in my chest, freezing everything else out. There was no room for panic, no space for pain from my surgery. There was only a single, clear objective: get my daughter. I walked straight past them, my footsteps silent on the cheap laminate floor. Their laughter faltered as they finally noticed me standing there. I didn't look at them. My eyes were locked on Sadie. I reached down into the box, my movements slow and deliberate, and lifted her out. She was so light. She collapsed against me, burying her face in my shoulder and wrapping her arms around my neck in a desperate grip. I held her tight against my good side, her sobs shaking both our bodies. I finally turned to Kelsey. My sister's face was a mixture of shock and annoyance, her phone still pointing at us. "Send me that video," I said. My voice was flat, devoid of any emotion. It didn't even sound like my own. She stared at me, her mouth hanging open. "What, Paige, you're home early. Send it. Now," I repeated, my gaze unwavering. Confused, maybe even a little scared by my tone, she fumbled with her phone and did it. A moment later, a notification chimed on my own phone in my pocket. I didn't take my eyes off her. Keeping Sadie tucked securely in one arm, I pulled out my phone with my free hand. I opened the message, saw the 96-second video file, and immediately forwarded it to my personal email. Then I uploaded it to a secure cloud drive, a permanent copy, untouchable. Only then did I look at the other two. At my mom, who was now sitting up, her expression souring into a familiar, defensive pout. At Trent, the greasy stranger who was just looking between us with a stupid grin on his face. "Get out," I said. The words were quiet, but they carried the weight of a lifetime of their carelessness. "All of you, get out of my house." My mom started to argue the way she always did. "Oh, for God's sake, Paige, don't be such a killjoy." It was a harmless prank, but the look in my eyes must have stopped her. It wasn't the look of her long-suffering daughter who cleaned up all her messes. It was the look of a stranger, a mother protecting her child. They saw it, and for once they didn't have a comeback. They gathered their things, still muttering about my lack of a sense of humor. I followed them to the door, a silent, menacing shadow, and watched them go. I didn't say another word until they were gone. Then I shut the door, slid the deadbolt, and fastened the chain. And then, finally, I sank to the floor, my back against the door, holding my sobbing, terrified child. After I finally got Sadie calmed down with a warm bath and her favorite cartoon, I tucked her into my bed. She wouldn't even consider sleeping in her own room. She drifted off to a restless sleep, her small hand clutching a fistful of my t-shirt. Only then, in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, did the adrenaline finally wear off. The shaking started in my hands and spread through my entire body. The block of ice in my chest shattered and the rage burned hot and clean. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. The screen lit up with Kelsey's name. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the answer button, then let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. I wasn't sure I ever would be again. A minute later, it buzzed again, a new voicemail. I listened to it on speaker, the volume turned down low. Kelsey's voice was whiny, full of the childish excuses she'd been using her whole life. "It was just a joke, Paige. Seriously, you're overreacting. We were just having fun." Trent, my mom's new friend, thought it was hilarious. "Why do you always have to ruin everything?" Then a text message from my mom lit up the screen. "You have no sense of humor. We were just having fun with her. You're making a big deal out of nothing." They didn't ask if Sadie was okay, not once. They didn't ask how my surgery went or why I was home early. Their only concern was their spoiled fun and my inconvenient reaction. I saved the voicemail. I took a screenshot of the text message, then I screenshotted the call log. Everything was evidence. I was a paralegal. I knew the importance of a paper trail. This was just a different kind of case. I remembered the way my mom raised me, or rather, didn't. And the way I was forced to raise Kelsey when our mom decided her own life was more interesting than ours. I was always the one cleaning up her messes, paying the bills she forgot, making excuses for her absences. This, I decided, was the last mess. I wasn't cleaning it up this time, I was documenting it piece by painful piece. Looking at Sadie's sleeping form, I felt a lifetime of resentment harden into something new, something solid and unbreakable. I became Kelsey's legal guardian when I was 18 years old. I was barely an adult myself, trying to figure out college applications and a future, when our mom disappeared on a 3-week bender with a man she'd met at a bar. She left $74 on the kitchen counter and a note that just said, "Be back soon." 3 weeks. No calls, no texts. The rent was due, the power was about to be cut off, and Kelsey, who was only 14 at the time, was eating stale cereal for dinner. I dropped my plans for a 4-year university and enrolled in community college so I could work. I picked up shifts at a diner and a retail store, my days a blur of cheap coffee, rude customers, and exhaustion. I worked to keep our tiny apartment, to pay for Kelsey's school supplies, to make sure the fridge wasn't always empty. My mom would reappear periodically, looking thin and worn out, full of empty promises and apologies that evaporated the moment she needed cash. And I, the responsible one, always gave it to her, hoping this time would be different. Kelsey never appreciated it. She couldn't see the sacrifices. To her, my exhaustion was just my normal state. The food in the fridge was her right. She saw my parenting as an oppressive burden, not the lifeline it was. She sulked when I couldn't afford the trendy jeans she wanted, borrowed money she never repaid, and later, when Sadie was born, she treated my daughter like a noisy, inconvenient piece of furniture. I had tried to forgive it all. I told myself that was just who they were, that their selfishness was a kind of sickness and you don't blame sick people for their symptoms. I tried to build a fragile peace, to believe that maybe one day they could change. The box, the video, the marker that spelled out "Baby Factory Returns," it shattered that fragile piece into a million pieces. This wasn't an isolated incident. It wasn't a joke that went too far. It was the culmination of a lifetime of their casual, thoughtless cruelty. They didn't see Sadie as a person, a bright, funny, loving little girl who was my entire world. They saw her as a prop, something to be used for their own amusement, for a few seconds of attention online, and that was a line they would never be allowed to cross again. The next morning, I took Sadie to the park. The sun was bright, the air was crisp, and I just needed to see her smile. I needed to replace the memory of her terror with something good. But she wasn't the same. She wouldn't leave my side, clinging to my leg as I pushed her on the swing. When another child ran by, shouting with joy, Sadie flinched and buried her face in my jeans. The carefree little girl I knew was gone, replaced by a shadow. When we got home and she was down for her nap, I sat at my kitchen table and made the call. I dialed the non-emergency police line. My heart was pounding, but my hand was steady. An officer took my information and I gave him my statement, my voice never wavering once. I was a paralegal. I knew how to be objective, how to present facts clearly and concisely. I described the cardboard box, the writing on the side, the yapping toy. I described the fear in my daughter's eyes, the way her body trembled. I told him my mom and sister were there and that a man I didn't know, Trent Walker, was also present. I told him my sister had filmed the entire thing. "I have a 96-second video of the incident," I said, my voice as cold and hard as steel. The officer was quiet for a moment. Then he asked, his tone gentle but firm, "Ma'am, based on what you've described, we could pursue charges for unlawful restraint and causing emotional distress to a minor. Do you want to press charges?" There was no hesitation. "Yes," I said. "Yes, I do, and I want a no-contact order against all 3 of them." The officer, whose name was Officer Miller, was patient and professional. He explained the process, the paperwork, the next steps. He gave me a case number, a string of digits that felt like a key to a door that would lock them out of our lives for good. When I hung up the phone, I took the first clean breath I'd taken in 24 hours. This wasn't revenge, it was a rescue mission. The nightmares started 3 nights after the incident. I was jolted awake by a scream from my bedroom, where Sadie was now sleeping in a little sleeping bag on the floor next to my bed. I rushed to her side and found her sitting bolt upright, her eyes wide with sleep-filled terror, her small body drenched in sweat. She was screaming about the monster box and the loud, bad doggy that was going to get her. I held her, rocking her back and forth, whispering that she was safe, that mommy was here, that the box was gone forever. But the fear had taken root in her mind. It happened again the next night and the night after that. She refused to sleep in her own room, a space she had loved, filled with her drawings and stuffed animals. Now it was a scary place. I went to a second-hand store and bought a used baby monitor for $28. I didn't need it to watch her, she was 3 feet away from me. I bought it to record the audio. I started a log in a spiral notebook. Date, time, duration of the nightmare, and exactly what she said in her panicked cries. It felt cold and clinical, but I knew it was more evidence, another brick in the wall I was building to protect her. During the day, she was a different child. The happy, confident girl who would run up to other kids at the playground was gone. In her place was a child suffering from terrible separation anxiety. She cried hysterically if I even went to the bathroom by myself, her small fists hammering on the door until I came out. Leaving her at daycare became a heart-wrenching ordeal of tears and pleas. I found a child therapist online, a woman named Leela Bennett who specialized in childhood trauma. Her office was calm and filled with toys, and she had a gentle voice that seemed to soothe Sadie, at least for the hour we were there. But the sessions were $110 each once a week. I didn't have that kind of money just lying around. I put it on my credit card without a second thought. Sadie's safety, her well-being, had a price, and I would pay it no matter what it cost me. Seeing my daughter, my whole world, reduced to a scared, clinging child didn't weaken my resolve, it fueled it. This wasn't just about punishment anymore, it was about reclaiming her peace. A week after I filed the police report, I got a call at work. It was Dana Brooks, the director of Sadie's daycare. Her voice was tight and professional, the tone she used when there was a problem. My stomach clenched. "Paige," she said, "I need to inform you of an incident that occurred this morning. Your sister, Kelsey, came to the center." I felt a chill go down my spine. "What did she want?" "She was demanding to see Sadie," Dana explained. "She wasn't on the approved pickup list, so of course we refused her entry into the classroom area." That's when she became very agitated. Dana told me how Kelsey had caused a scene in the lobby, shouting that I was unstable and vindictive, that I was trying to poison the family against her with lies. Her voice was loud enough that several children, including Sadie, heard the commotion from their classroom. Sadie, hearing her aunt's angry voice, immediately became distraught. She started crying, thinking the box people, as she now called them, were there to get her and put her back in the box. It took 2 teachers over an hour to calm her down. She spent the rest of the morning sitting in a corner, clutching a teddy bear and refusing to play with anyone. "I want to be very clear, Paige," Dana said, her voice firm. "Kelsey Collins is no longer permitted on this property for any reason. We have a zero-tolerance policy for this kind of behavior. The safety of our children is our top priority." She then offered to write a formal, signed statement detailing the entire incident. "It might be helpful for you," she said, her voice softening with empathy. "Yes, please," I said, my voice thick with gratitude. "Thank you, Dana, that would be very helpful." More paper for the file, more proof. My mom and my sister weren't just denying what they did. They were actively trying to undermine my credibility and my role as a mother, right in the one place Sadie was supposed to feel completely safe. Their selfishness knew no bounds. The financial strain was becoming a constant, crushing weight. My job as a paralegal paid the bills, but just barely. I was a single mom with no child support and no help from anyone. Now my expenses were spiraling out of control. The therapist's bill alone was $440 a month. My credit card balance, once zero, was climbing at an alarming rate. Then the notice came from Sadie's daycare, a bright orange slip of paper tucked into her cubby. It was a late payment warning. Daycare was $930 a month, my single biggest expense. I was 2 days late with the payment, and an $85 late fee was looming if I didn't pay in the next 3 days. $85 might as well have been $1,000. I started cutting corners everywhere I could. I ate plain pasta for dinner 4 nights a week. Lunch became peanut butter sandwiches and an apple. I wanted to make sure Sadie still had fresh fruit, vegetables, and the yogurt she loved. Her needs came first, always. I started picking up extra document review work from the law firm, freelance stuff I could do from home. I would put Sadie to bed and then sit at my laptop, typing until my eyes burned and the words on the screen started to blur, often until 2 in the morning. The dull ache in my side from the appendectomy was a constant companion, a physical reminder of how thin my safety net truly was. I was supposed to be resting, recovering. Instead, I was fighting a war on 3 fronts: legal, emotional, and financial. One night, as I was staring at a stack of bills I couldn't pay, my phone buzzed with a text from my mom. "I know you're struggling, Paige. I heard you're late on daycare. Drop this nonsense with the police and I'll help you with rent this month." I read the message twice. It wasn't an offer of help, it was blackmail. It was a threat wrapped in a phony layer of concern. She was dangling money over my head, assuming my desperation would be enough to make me betray my own child. The rage I felt was so intense it made me dizzy. I took a screenshot of the message, attached it to an email, and sent it to Officer Miller, the police officer handling my case. The subject line was simple: more evidence. I couldn't shake the feeling that this whole thing was planned. The box, the toy, Kelsey filming, it felt too staged, too deliberate to be a spontaneous bad idea. That feeling gnawed at me during my late-night work sessions. I remembered Kelsey talking endlessly about a private group she was in on social media, a place where people shared prank videos. I still had an old, anonymous profile from years ago that I'd made to keep tabs on a sketchy ex-boyfriend. I logged in, the password surprisingly still in my memory, and started searching. It didn't take long to find the group. It was called Tough Love Laughs. The description said it was for parents with a real sense of humor. I scrolled through the group's feed for hours, my stomach churning with disgust. The videos were a parade of parents humiliating their children for clicks and likes. A dad telling his son his puppy had run away, only to reveal it was a joke as the boy sobbed. A mom pretending to throw her daughter's favorite doll in the trash. It was a cesspool of casual cruelty disguised as humor. And then I found it. A post from Kelsey, dated 1 week before she'd terrorized my daughter. "Got a hilarious idea for a factory return prank on my niece," she had written. "She's 4, so her reaction will be epic. Gonna tell her she's being sent back. Need ideas for props to make it look legit." The comments section was a nightmare. A dozen strangers, her online friends, were cheering her on. One person suggested what to write on the box. Another recommended using a scary, noisy toy to up the drama. Someone else wrote, "Make sure you get her face when she starts crying." That's the money shot. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment joke that got out of hand. It was a premeditated performance, crowdsourced from an audience of ghouls. She had workshopped her cruelty. I meticulously took screenshots of the entire thread, every single comment, every single piece of encouragement. The premeditation was no longer a feeling, it was a fact, documented in pixels and time-stamped for the world to see. The animatronic dog, that stupid, yapping poodle, it had bothered me from the moment I saw it. It was new, its white fur clean, its plastic eyes still shiny. It wasn't the kind of thing my mom would ever own. She hated clutter and considered toys a waste of money. So where did it come from? Then I remembered. The day they left, in their hurried, angry exit, my mom had left her purse behind. It was a cheap, black vinyl thing she'd tossed on the armchair. At the time, I was so focused on Sadie that I just shoved it onto the entryway table, intending to put it outside my door later. But now, a thought nagged at me. I knew I shouldn't. I knew it was an invasion of privacy, but privacy felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. My daughter's safety trumped my mother's right to keep her secrets. I walked over to the table and picked up the purse. It felt light and flimsy. I unzipped it. Inside was the usual collection of junk: old, crumpled tissues, loose change, a half-used tube of lipstick, and a crumpled receipt from a big box store. My hands trembled slightly as I unfolded it. The date printed at the top was from the morning of the incident, just hours before I came home. I scanned the list of items: milk, bread, and one other thing. The item description read, "Yapping Poodle Animatronic Toy." The price was $39.99. She had gone out and purchased a prop. She had spent $40 specifically to terrorize my 4-year-old daughter. The cold, transactional nature of it stole my breath. This wasn't just passive participation in Kelsey's awful idea. This was an active investment in it, a financial transaction tied directly to their cruelty. I took out my phone and laid the receipt flat on the table, taking several high-resolution photos of it from different angles, making sure the date and the item were perfectly clear. Then I carefully folded it, put it back in her purse, and set the bag outside my front door. Let her think she just forgot it. Kelsey's social media channel wasn't huge, but her 7,200 followers were enough to make her feel like a legitimate influencer. Her whole identity was wrapped up in it. I scrolled through her profile, a curated collection of cheap fashion hauls and so-called discipline pranks. Most of them were harmless, I guess, hiding a favorite toy for an hour, telling a kid vegetables were candy. Stupid, but not monstrous. But lately, the pranks had been getting edgier, more mean-spirited. I could see she was chasing engagement, trying to get bigger reactions. My deep dive into the Tough Love Laughs group led me to a message exchange she'd had with another creator, someone with a much larger following who specialized in making their children cry for views. Kelsey had written, "My views are stuck. I feel like I'm doing the same old stuff and people are bored. I need something that'll get a big reaction." The other user's reply was chillingly direct: "Fear gets clicks. The more the kid cries, the more people share. It's controversial, so people comment more. The algorithm loves it." Kelsey's reply appeared a minute later: "That's what I was thinking. The factory return idea is gold. No one in our group has done that one yet. It's gonna be huge." There it was. She wasn't just trying to be funny for her family. She was trying to build her brand on my daughter's trauma. She was planning to monetize Sadie's tears. In that moment, Sadie wasn't her niece. She was content. A stepping stone to more followers, more likes, more validation from a group of strangers on the internet. This realization settled the last of my doubts, the last lingering whisper of hope that this was all a terrible misunderstanding. There was no family to save here. There was only a child to protect. They were served with the no-contact order and the notice of the pending charges. Their response was not remorse, it was pure, unfiltered rage. A few days later, I learned just how deep that rage went. I was walking back to my apartment building from the grocery store, juggling 2 heavy bags. Sadie was safely at daycare. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 5:30, and the sun was beginning to dip below the rooftops. Suddenly, a car screeched to a halt on the street beside me. It was my mom's beat-up sedan. The doors flew open and she, Kelsey, and Trent got out, their bodies blocking my path on the sidewalk. My mom's face was twisted into a mask of fury, her eyes wild. "You are trying to ruin our lives over a joke," she screamed, her voice echoing in the quiet street. People on their balconies looked down. Kelsey predictably had her phone out, filming me again. "You're a vindictive liar, Paige," she shrieked. "You're tearing this family apart." My heart was pounding, but I stood my ground. I put my hand up, palm out, a gesture to stop. "You are violating a court-ordered no-contact order," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "You need to leave right now." That's when Trent stepped forward. He seemed bigger and more menacing than I remembered from my living room. He smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap beer. He got right in my face, and before I could react, he grabbed my right shoulder, his fingers digging into my muscle hard. "You're going to drop this," he hissed, his foul breath washing over my face. "You're going to call the cops and tell them it was all a misunderstanding, or you'll be sorry." The shock of his touch, the blatant threat in his voice, made me stumble back. My grip on the grocery bags loosened. One of them split open and a carton of eggs smashed on the sidewalk, the bright yellow yolks bleeding across the gray concrete. What they hadn't counted on in their blind rage was that I wasn't as alone as they thought. I had started carrying a small digital voice recorder in my jacket pocket everywhere I went. The moment I saw their car, I had discreetly clicked it on. It was recording everything. What they also hadn't counted on was the time of day. It was 5:30 p.m. People were coming home from work. My neighbor from apartment 3B, a kind woman named Nina Gray, was on her balcony directly above us, watering her tomato plants. I saw her pause, her watering can held in midair as she pulled her phone from her pocket. Across the street, another neighbor, Tom Reed from the first floor, was walking his little terrier. He stopped dead in his tracks, his leash held tight, and he raised his phone too. They didn't shout. They didn't intervene. They just bore witness. They recorded my mom's screaming. They recorded Kelsey's false accusations. And they recorded, in perfect, undeniable clarity, Trent physically assaulting me and hissing threats in my face. Most importantly, they recorded my calm, repeated requests for them to leave me alone and to honor the court order they were so flagrantly violating. The sight of the phones finally registered. Trent saw Nina first, and his hand dropped from my shoulder as if he'd been burned. He muttered something under his breath and took a step back. Kelsey lowered her own phone, her face paling. They all piled back into the car as quickly as they had gotten out and sped away, leaving me standing on the sidewalk next to a puddle of broken eggs. Nina and Tom immediately came rushing over, their phones still in their hands. "Are you okay?" Nina asked, her eyes wide with concern. "We got all of it. We have it on video." Tom nodded in agreement, his face grim. "We'll send it to you right now." Standing there on the sidewalk, surrounded by the mess of my ruined groceries, I knew there was no going back. Any tiny, lingering hope I might have harbored that this could be handled quietly, that they might eventually see reason, was gone. They had escalated this from a private, domestic cruelty to a public assault and a criminal violation. They had made their choice. Now I was making mine. Nina and Tom both airdropped their video files to my phone right there on the spot, two different angles of the entire ugly confrontation. My own voice recorder had captured Trent's threat with perfect, damning clarity. I thanked them, my voice shaking slightly for the first time that day. Their simple, decent act of bearing witness felt like a shield. I felt a surge of gratitude that was so powerful it almost brought me to tears. That night, after I had cleaned myself up and eaten a sad dinner of toast, I sat down at my computer. I composed a new email to the district attorney's office, CCing Officer Miller. I attached Nina's video, I attached Tom's video, I attached my audio file. The subject line was simple and direct. Violation of no contact order and assault case hash. I hit send. This wasn't just about seeking protection anymore. This was about seeking conviction. The assault videos had an immediate and powerful effect. The district attorney's office filed a motion for an emergency hearing. A judge, after viewing the footage, issued a stricter, emergency protective order. They were now barred from coming within 500 yards of my home, my workplace, and most importantly, Sadie's daycare center. The invisible line I had tried to draw had now been reinforced with steel. Trent was arrested the next day for assault and for violating the original order. He was released on bail less than 24 hours later, a fact that did little to soothe my nerves. My mom and Kelsey were also formally charged with violating the order. The system was working slowly but surely, but it didn't make me feel safe. It made me feel like a target. The ambush had proven they were unpredictable and willing to escalate. I went to the hardware store and bought new, heavy-duty deadbolts for my doors. I spent $100 I didn't have on a cheap security camera and mounted it in my front window, aiming it at the sidewalk. Every time a car slowed down on my street, every time I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my door, my heart leaped into my throat. The feeling of being hunted settled deep in my bones. My life became a series of strategic maneuvers. I changed my route to work every day. I coordinated with Dana at the daycare to use a different, less visible entrance for drop-off and pickup. I stopped going for walks after dark. The world that had once felt open and full of possibilities had shrunk to a few heavily guarded, familiar paths. I was a prisoner in my own life, and the people holding the key were supposed to be my family. Unable to get to me directly, they turned to a new weapon, a smear campaign carried out on social media and through relatives they enlisted as their flying monkeys. Kelsey, ever the content creator, posted a tearful, cleverly edited video. In it, she claimed I was an unstable, vengeful person who was tearing our family apart over a simple misunderstanding. She sobbed about how much she loved her niece and how her heart was broken by my cruelty. She even implied I was jealous of her close relationship with our mom. The video got thousands of views, then the phone calls started. Distant aunts, uncles, and cousins I hadn't spoken to in years started calling me. They had all heard my mom and Kelsey's version of the story. They told me to forgive and forget, to not be so dramatic, that family is family. My mom had told them I was mentally ill, that my emergency surgery had unhinged me and I was having some kind of breakdown. People I didn't even know started leaving hateful comments on my social media profiles, calling me a monster and a liar. I quickly made all my accounts private, but the damage was done. They were executing a coordinated campaign to paint me as the aggressor and themselves as the poor, misunderstood victims. They weren't just trying to avoid legal consequences. They were trying to rewrite reality itself, to isolate me from any possible support system until I was completely alone. It was exhausting and infuriating, but every lie they told, every manipulative post they made just strengthened my resolve. I screenshotted everything. Their lies were just another form of evidence. Their lawyer's letter arrived in an envelope that looked like it had been printed on the cheapest paper his office could find. The name at the top was bold and confident, Ruddy Marks or something equally showy, and the tone was all faux concern. They offered a deal. My family would agree to counseling and some kind of community program, they wrote, and in return the district attorney could drop the charges. It was wrapped in syrupy language about healing and putting the family back together, like they were offering a warm bandage for something that had needed surgery. I read it 3 times, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. It was exactly what I expected, an attempt to sweep everything under a nicer rug. Their lawyer tried to make the ugliness look like a misunderstanding you could fix with a few therapy sessions and a public apology. He called them well-intentioned, as if that changed what they did. The audacity of suggesting my daughter's terror could be undone with a weekend of family counseling made my stomach turn. A call came an hour after I set the letter down on my kitchen table. It was Miss Evans from the district attorney's office. She sounded tired, like she'd read too many human tragedies that week, but she was sharp and practical in a way that made me trust her right away. "They're going to try to humanize this," she said without preamble. "They'll say it was a joke, that they love the child, that it was meant to be harmless. They'll look for anything to make you seem unstable. They'll talk about your surgery, your money, your stress. They'll try to make the jury feel sorry for them instead of the child they hurt." Her voice was blunt but fair. "You need to be prepared for that. They will try to paint you as a vindictive mother or as someone who's after money. Remember to keep to the facts. Don't get baited into an emotional fight. Let the evidence do the talking." I thought about everything I'd saved. The video, the text, the receipt, the daycare statement, the therapist's notes, the 2 neighbor videos. I pictured a defense attorney on his feet, smirking as he tried to tear me down with questions about credit cards and custody battles. The thought of being reduced to a series of bad decisions made by a tired single mom when what I'd done was stand up for my child sickened me. I didn't want sympathy, I wanted safety. Miss Evans paused. "Are you prepared for that?" she asked, quietly. I looked at a drawing Sadie had taped to the fridge that morning, 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow labeled Mommy and Sadie. The lines were shaky but earnest. I swallowed hard. "I am," I said, and my voice surprised me with how steady it sounded. Saying it out loud felt like a promise, not just to myself but to Sadie. I would be the steady one. I would make the papers and the recordings and the people who had been witnesses the story. I would not let them turn this into something it wasn't. A week later, late on a rainy Tuesday, my phone buzzed with a message request from someone named Maria. The message preview was short and startling. "I think I know something about Trent Walker you should see. He used to date my cousin." My thumb hovered over the notification. My first reaction was suspicion. This could be Mom's people trying to snake into my life with fake witnesses or traps. I'd been threatened before. I didn't want another setup. But curiosity and the desperate hope that there might be more proof nudged me to open it. The message thread was polite and quick. Maria said she'd read about the case in a local forum and felt sick for Sadie. She said her cousin had dated Trent years ago and had kept evidence after a messy breakup. That sounded promising and also weirdly specific. I asked simple questions. "How do you know him? Why would your cousin share anything? Can you prove this isn't a joke?" And she answered each one with names and dates, things an imposter would have trouble faking. Her account had real photos, family birthdays, a dog named Buster, an 8th grade graduation, and a pattern of posts that fit a regular human life. Nothing looked scrubbed for the purpose of helping me. It was a small thing, but it made me breathe easier. I told her I wasn't going to respond to anyone claiming to speak for me publicly, that I wanted anything she had to go straight to the district attorney. She said she understood and asked if I trusted her to send the info. I said yes. She messaged again a few hours later. "My cousin found something on an old tablet Trent left behind after a fight. He kept messages open and they synced. I can send screenshots if you want." I almost laughed at the dramatic timing, how neatly the universe kept sliding pieces toward me when I needed them. It felt like someone had pushed a lever and the next domino fell into place. I told her to send what she had, and then I sat with my phone on my knees, the glow of the screen a small, steady light in the dark room, waiting for whatever proof she was going to offer. When the screenshots arrived, my hands went ice cold. They were messy little images of a messaging app, timestamps clear as daylight. The conversation began the week before the incident. It was between a contact saved as Sharon and a number labeled Trent. The tone was blunt and businesslike. My stomach flipped as I read, "Sharon, need you to help with a thing with my granddaughter. Need an extra pair of hands to make it work. Trent, what's in it for me? Sharon, $250 and a case of beer. You just have to be there and do the factory thing. Make sure the kid is scared enough for the video. Trent." Deal. There it was, plain and ugly, money, beer, instructions. It read like a short, ugly contract. The dates matched the timeline I already had in my head. It wasn't some childish prank cooked up in a moment of bad judgment. This looked like a business transaction. My mouth went dry. I scrolled through more of the thread and found follow-ups, messages about what to write on the box, where to buy the toy, a line about filming it from a couple of angles for cross-posting. The planning was thorough, petty, and cold. There were other messages, too, from a woman who called Trent domineering and dangerous, mentioning an old restraining order from years ago. He'd been aggressive before, she said. That piece of information explained the way his hand had dug into my shoulder that day and why he hadn't thought twice about grabbing me in public. It made the whole tableau make sense. Mom hired someone who would do what she wanted without hesitation, someone with a history of using fear as leverage. I sat with the screenshots in the blue light of my kitchen and felt something shift. Anger, relief, a bitter mixture of both. The screenshots were a smoking gun, not just of the planning but of the payment and the motive. This wasn't a family prank. It was an orchestrated plan to humiliate a child and a transaction that reduced my daughter to a commodity. I forwarded everything to Miss Evans. I kept my message simple. "This is more." She called within an hour. There was a sharpness in her voice that mattered more than any show of sympathy. "This is what we needed," she said. "The texts are the last piece. They show coordination and payment. That moves the case from a neighborhood argument to something we can take very seriously." Her words were clinical, but I heard the weight behind them. She explained in plain language, no legal fluff, that these conversations showed intent. Intent made it harder for the defense to argue it was a joke that went sideways. Intent meant they could be held accountable for planning to frighten a child for entertainment and for hiring someone to do it. She didn't promise a verdict. She didn't offer me solace I didn't earn. She said what she saw and what it could mean for the case. For the first time since that door opened and I found Sadie in the box, something like vindication washed over me. It wasn't the warm, triumphant kind you read about in novels. It was colder, steadier, like ice water poured over a burn. This proof didn't erase the fear, the therapy bills, or the nights I'd spent awake listening to a monitor to record a child's nightmares. It didn't make my mom's face any less familiar or the betrayal any less sharp, but it did something else. It took the thing they had used to shame and belittle me and turned it into the very evidence that would hold them to account. Miss Evans' voice softened for a heartbeat. "We'll move carefully from here, Paige. I can't promise outcomes, but this changes the ledger. Thank you for sending it right away." I hung up and sat at my kitchen table with the phone in my palm, the house around me quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. Outside, rain tapped the window. I thought of Sadie's small hand in mine, of the drawing on the fridge, of the mornings she'd wake up and slide into my bed like some tiny, trusting animal. The screenshots on my screen were ugly and perfect at the same time. They were proof that this was not an accident, not a family mistake. They were the last piece of a puzzle I never wanted to have to finish. But now that it was complete, I felt a fierce, cold kind of peace settle over me. I would do what I had to do. I would see this through, for her. The phone buzzed on the kitchen counter just after midnight. I almost didn't answer it. My hand hovered above the screen because who calls at that hour unless it's bad news? The number was blocked. I pressed the green button out of habit because sometimes it's nothing and sometimes it's someone who needs help. This wasn't someone who needed help. A man's voice came through, low and gravelly, like someone who smoked and worked nights. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't need to. "You think you're so smart with your videos and your texts," he said, words slow and deliberate. "People like Trent have friends. You should think about what happens after the trial. A lot can happen to a single mom." The line went dead before I could say anything. My hand went numb from holding the phone. For a second, I sat there listening to the refrigerator hum and the small, even breaths of the child sleeping in the room next door. The house felt too quiet, as if the sound had been swallowed by something big and waiting. I called the police and tried to explain. They were kind and they wrote down everything I could tell them, but a blocked number is like a ghost. There's only so much they can do without more to go on. Officer Miller told me he'd note it in the file, told me to call back if anything else happened. He didn't promise protection. He didn't say he could make the fear stop. I sat at the kitchen table with the phone in my palm, the red notification for an unanswered call still glowing on the screen. I wrapped my fingers around Sadie's favorite stuffed rabbit, the one with a missing ear, and pressed it to my chest like it was a small shield. I could imagine the side roads, the corners where people waited for weeks before they decided to act. I thought of Trent's face up close, his hand on my shoulder, the way he leaned in like he owned me. Fear settled over me like a wet coat. It made everything heavy. I thought about all the nights I'd already spent awake listening for sounds outside. This call turned that background anxiety into a sharp, hot thing. I wanted to be brave in front of Sadie, to hold her when she woke from dreams and tell her the monster had gone away. But bravery isn't a switch you flip. Sometimes it's a small, steady thing you keep doing even when your hands are shaking. I stayed up a long time that night, notebook on the table, writing down the time of the call, the words he used, how he sounded. I logged it like evidence because that's what I'd been doing for weeks, turning every quiet terror into a thing on paper so it couldn't be denied. But paper doesn't always keep you safe. Paper doesn't stop a car from slowing down outside your building. Paper doesn't make the phone stop ringing. The next day, the weight of everything settled on me so hard I thought I might break. I spread the bills out on the table like cards in a language I was learning to read. Collection notices like small white flags, the daycare late slip with its bright orange line, the therapy invoices folded like tiny, accusing letters. My credit card balance loomed like a number that belonged to someone else's life. I was exhausted in a way that sleep couldn't touch. I reread every screenshot, every message, every report with a kind of frantic, careful hunger, looking for a mistake, a hole, anything the defense might sink a hook into. My mom's laughing face from that day kept flashing behind my eyes, a crude slideshow of the moment they decided my child was a joke. I could hear Kelsey giggling the way she'd shrugged afterward like she'd done nothing wrong. The more I read, the more I could see how easily someone could frame me. The single mom, tired, recovering from surgery, angry about money. I could see the story they'd try to sell. It hurt that people I thought might understand couldn't. My few close friends were supportive in small, earnest ways, meals dropped off, texts that said call me if you need anything, but none of them could truly measure the betrayal of family. My ex-husband was where he'd always been, gone. The solitude of that fact filled the room more than the piles of paper. I felt cornered by systems and by bloodlines, both built on the idea that family things should be fixed quietly, not dragged into the light. For a time, I let my thoughts wander into a dangerous place. I imagined packing a bag in the dark, taking Sadie and leaving town, changing our names, finding a new life without court dates and tweets and harassed messages. It was a seductive, stupidly simple dream, peel off the map and start over. But the more I pictured it, the more I saw what it would teach my daughter. Running would teach her to hide. It would teach her that the world is a place where you must disappear to be safe. I couldn't let that be her lesson, so I stayed. I went back to the files, to the videos, to the logs. I breathed into the steady rhythm of what I could control, more screenshots, more copies, more witnesses, because truth felt like ballast. It was clumsy and clinical and raw, but it was something I could hand the court when it was our turn. I reminded myself that this wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure Sadie never had to look at that box again. At night, I would tiptoe into Sadie's little nest on the floor and watch her breathe. She slept like she was still small enough to be magic, her cheeks round and soft, a thumb pressed against the corner of her lip. Her hair fell across her forehead in a wild mess of blonde, and for a moment when I watched her, I could forget everything else. On her nightstand, under a lamp that cast a small, warm circle, was a picture she'd drawn that morning. 2 stick figures holding hands under a rainbow, labeled Mommy and Sadie in her uneven letters. I sat there in the dim light and felt the kind of clarity that comes from seeing a child you love simple and whole. The idea of packing up and running didn't feel like protection anymore, it felt like surrender. I wanted to teach her that when someone hurts you, you stand up and say it out loud. I wanted her to know her voice mattered, and mine would use every tool to make that matter true. I believed, in the small, stubborn part of myself that had been keeping a steady list of evidence for weeks, that truth could do things. It could make the nameless call into something that could be pointed at and shown. It could take the tape of that night and show people what a laugh had cost a little girl. It could make the screenshots and receipts and neighbor videos into a story so clear that a judge couldn't ignore it. I wasn't naive. I knew courts didn't always save people, but I also knew this: if you don't hand the truth to a stranger who can make decisions, it just stays a hurt you carry alone. When the courthouse day came, I packed that belief along with me. I dressed in a simple navy dress I hoped looked like someone who had her life together. I put Sadie's drawing folded in my pocket like a talisman. I wanted to be the calm, measured person Miss Evans had coached me to be. I wanted my hands to be steady, my voice to be clear. The courtroom smelled like old paper and polish. It was small, wood-paneled, with thin light slicing through high windows and landing on the scarred tables. The bench where Judge Martin Hayes sat was raised, making his face look a little like a stern photograph. My mom, Kelsey, and Trent sat at the defendant's table, shoulders hunched, eyes on the table or staring into nothing. None of them looked at me. Kelsey had tears on her face that were too practiced, too camera-ready for my taste. I sat beside Miss Evans, the prosecutor. She had a folder neatly stacked with copies of everything I'd brought, and the way she set her pen down made me trust her like she had a map I didn't. I had decided to testify because I could not let them control the story by yelling the loudest. Miss Evans had told me to stick to the facts, to keep the emotional things for the jury to see in the recordings. "Let the evidence do the work," she had said, and I had repeated that line to myself until it felt true. Their lawyer began right away, painting a picture of a close family and an unfortunate prank gone wrong. His voice was smooth and practiced, the kind you hear on pre-recorded shows where everything is edited to sound kinder. He called it a misunderstanding, a lapse in judgment. He asked the courtroom to see the softer side of people who make mistakes. I focused on a small crack in the ceiling instead of watching him. I counted my breaths in a way that kept my hands from trembling. The crack was a good place to look because it didn't lie, and neither did the videos waiting on the screen in Miss Evans' folder. I waited for my moment. I had prepared for this. I had decided that when I spoke, I would speak in the plain language I used every day at the firm because honesty in small words is harder to twist than a flood of emotion. Miss Evans started the presentation the way she always did, calm, plain, precise. The first thing she did was play the 96-second video from Kelsey's phone. That stupid little clip filled the room. The box, the poodle toy clicking, Sadie's little hands clutched to her knees, the way her lip trembled before she broke into a sob. The sound was the worst part. It was small and sharp in that big room, and it made people lean forward like they were trying to catch something falling. When the video ended, you could hear a pin drop. You could see my mom's shoulders twitch. Kelsey pressed her hands to her face and cried in that way that looked rehearsed, quick, loud sobs, then sniffles. I felt my own chest tighten, but I kept my hands folded in my lap like Miss Evans had told me to, like I was holding a file that mattered more than my feelings. Next, Dana's written statement was read aloud. The daycare director's voice over the speaker was steady. She described Kelsey's scene in the lobby, how it upset the kids, how it took teachers an hour to calm Sadie. Little facts with big weight, how long it took, who witnessed it, those details are what made the moment real. Not just a claim, but a series of times and names and notes that lined up with the video. Then Miss Evans read Leela Bennett's report, the therapist who had been working with Sadie. Leela's words were simple and clear. Nightmares, clinginess, separation fears, and small things Sadie said in the dark about the box and the loud doggy. Leela had written about the change in a child who'd once been confident. The room was full of grown faces, suddenly very human and very soft, because pediatric fear doesn't fit the neat lines people prefer to believe about family. After that, the two neighbor videos played. Nina's clip showed the car pulling up on the sidewalk, my mom screaming, and then Trent grabbing my shoulder. Tom's angle caught the way Trent leaned close and hissed at me. Both videos matched my own recorded audio. His threat was clear, his hand on my skin audible. Watching those clips, I could feel my heart beat in my throat, but it was a steady sound, not wild. The recordings lined up like puzzle pieces, each one proving a part of what I kept saying. Finally, the texts were displayed. The messages where Mom had offered money and beer to hire Trent scrolled across the screen. The timestamps matched the day the poodle toy was bought, the day the purse receipt showed. Words on a screen, plain as a grocery list that said she had planned and paid for it. The judge watched them without much expression, but I could tell those messages landed. They made the whole thing look less like a family argument and more like something someone had bought and scheduled. When it was their turn, their stories began to fall apart under the weight of the evidence. Mom tried to laugh it off, calling the texts a joke, saying she never meant for anyone to get hurt. She looked small and angry, shifting from one foot to the other like a person uncomfortable in their own skin. Kelsey sobbed on the stand, words tumbling out about it was for content and "I love Sadie," but her statements kept circling back to the planning posts and the messages we had already shown. The contradictions were plain. She kept saying she loved her niece while admitting she'd already asked strangers online how to make the video look scarier. Trent sat with his jaw tight. When questioned about the prior incident someone had mentioned, he shrugged and said he was just helping out. He tried to sound casual about the hand he'd put on me and the promise of money, but his eyes kept flicking toward his phone like he was waiting for someone to tell him what to say. Their lawyer, with his smooth tone, attempted to keep them in a softer light. He asked about my surgery, my cards, my late payments, trying to draw the jury into a story of a stressed single mom lashing out. He smiled like he thought charm would work where facts couldn't. But every time he asked something meant to weaken me, Miss Evans answered with the next thing on our list: another recording, another receipt, another witness. I stuck to what I knew, what I had seen, what Sadie had said, what the videos showed. I kept my voice even and my sentences short. When their lawyer tried to needle me by implying motives, I didn't rise to it. I had no interest in dramatics. I only wanted the truth to stand up and be tall enough that no one could ignore it. So I said what I had to say plainly. They made my child terrified for views and for cash. They turned my daughter's fear into something they could sell. I wanted her to be safe and I wanted them stopped. Judge Hayes didn't take long. He read from his notes, then looked up over the courtroom at the three of them. His voice was low and steady when he spoke a sentence I'd rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. This was not a prank, he said. It was a deliberate act that endangered a child. He addressed my mom first, naming the way she'd helped plan and pay for the stunt and how that made her actions worse than a careless mistake. He told Kelsey that using a child's fear for internet attention was not protected by excuses about content and that people must be responsible for how they involve children. Then he turned to Trent and spoke the words that made my blood both cold and oddly warmed. He wouldn't tolerate anyone who used violence to cover for cruelty. The sentences felt like music and like a hammer at the same time. Kelsey was given time in county and probation, enough to be a real punishment and a real warning. Mom got more time, reflecting the planning and her role in the street assault. Trent got the longest stretch for actually putting hands on me and for his history of menacing behavior. The judge extended the order that kept them away from our home and from Sadie's daycare for years. 5 years, he said, where they could not come near us. My throat closed with relief so big it surprised me. I didn't watch them leave. I didn't want to see the faces they made when they heard the judge say the words that took their power away. I stared straight ahead until my vision blurred, until the courtroom smelled like dust and the wood under my palms felt smooth and real. I let out the breath I'd been holding for months. It felt like something physical lifting, like the weight on a scale finally moving toward balance. The case was done in the legal sense, but more than that, something in our life had shifted. The people who had hurt us were being held to the truth I'd gathered in corners and in the dark, and for once truth was louder than their lies. 6 months later, the apartment is quiet in a way that doesn't make my shoulders tense. It's the kind of quiet that smells like clean laundry and orange peel soap, not the sharp, waiting quiet that had hovered over us for months. Sadie still goes to Leela's office, but the notes those weekly sessions produced are softer now, less about nightmares and more about routines and games that help her feel safe. She hums when she draws, that small sound of a child rebuilding herself with crayons. The sleeping bag is back in her room. She now chooses it some nights because she likes the glow-in-the-dark stars, not because she's afraid. They tried to call once. Kelsey used a blocked number the week she was released, sobbing and asking for money like nothing had changed. I stood at the kitchen sink, water running over my hands, and listened to her plead with the same old entitlement in her voice. I hung up. It was a small, private act, but it felt like closing a door I didn't owe anyone the right to open. I haven't heard from Mom at all. I don't know where she is, and I don't want to. The silence where their chaos used to live is a gift, even if it comes at a hard price. The legal fight left me tired and a little poorer. Between therapy costs and the security upgrades and the months of paperwork, the bank account looks like it had a bad year. I still get the occasional jolt, loud noises at night, or a car door slamming, and I'll feel that old fear flash across my chest. It doesn't hang around as long as it used to, but it's a reminder that healing isn't a straight line. I had to mourn the mother and sister I thought I might one day have and accept that those versions were never real. That grief is private and sharp. But I also got something I would have paid 1,000 small prices for: my daughter's safety. The cost of peace was high, but the cost of living under their chaos would have been higher. There are nights I worry if I did the right thing, if the court could have done more, or if the sentences will be enough to teach them anything. But then Sadie brings me a drawing and insists we read the same book twice because it's lucky, and I remember why I did this. Some bills still arrive in envelopes I can't quite afford to open, but there are lunches where Sadie giggles so big milk comes out of her nose, and for those simple, messy moments I would pay it all again. Our circle is small: me, my little girl, Nina and Tom, who bring over pasta, Dana, who always has a smile and a new game for Sadie, and Leela, who taught a frightened child how to use words against fear. We're building a family that looks after each other. The freedom we've bought with time and money and hard nights is worth every exhausted hour. If someone asked me, would I do it again? Would I drag my family into court, gather all the ugly proof, and let strangers see what my family did? I wouldn't make a big speech. I'd do it and keep my voice low. Because safety isn't sentimental, it's work. It's taking the thing that hurt you and making sure no one else gets hurt the same way. It's paying a cost now so your child doesn't carry that cost forever. That's what revenge meant for me. It wasn't about calls to be heard or public shaming. It was about stopping the small cruelties from becoming a lifetime for a child. And for that, the price I paid turned out to be an investment in a quiet life where Sadie can sing while she draws. I used my tax refund, $612, on a day that felt like buying back something small and priceless. We went to the zoo and spent the whole morning watching Sadie's face light up at the penguins and the lazy, enormous elephants. She pressed her nose to the glass at the otter tank until it fogged, and when she laughed, I felt a part of me unclench that I hadn't known was holding on so tight. We ate greasy zoo fries and shared cotton candy, and for the first time in months she didn't flinch when a stranger smiled at her. She just smiled back. That refund bought us a new bookshelf that afternoon. We picked it out together at a small second-hand shop, painted blue, a little wobbly, and I fixed the loose screw when we got home. We filled it with library books, some old favorites and a few new ones about brave little animals and kind people. She made a nest for her stuffed rabbit on the middle shelf, and then she lined her dolls on the top as if they were an audience ready to listen. It was small, ordinary work, but it felt like building a wall of normal around us. Our circle grew in quiet, steady ways. Nina and Tom stopped by with dinner 2 Tuesdays in a row. Nina brought a lemon pie and Tom fixed my bathroom sink without charging anything. Dana from the daycare started bringing home little crafts Sadie forgot, and Leela, the therapist, texted me the names of games that help a child name a feeling. I invited Nina and Tom over one night and Sadie drew a giant rainbow on the whiteboard while we ate. They clapped for her and that light in her eyes stayed lit. The other day she was playing with dolls and made one sit in a timeout because it had been mean to the other. She looked up at me, solemn as anything, and said, "We don't hurt people in this house." My heart almost broke open. That was the whole point, to make a home where safety was a rule and love was the louder thing. I didn't turn their cruelty into spectacle. I turned it into proof. The videos, the texts, the receipts, they became the paper trail that closed the door on them. The work was hard and expensive and private and sometimes ugly, but it bought us this quiet, a house where my daughter could draw and sing and forget the box. That was worth every sleepless night and every bill. I'd pay it all again to hear her laugh like that. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight for your peace, share your experience in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one, and I'll see you in the next video.